What if one mistake, one exhausted night, changed everything you thought you knew about power, loyalty, and love? She never meant to fall asleep there. She never expected him to come home early. And she never imagined that the man who controlled her career would be the one forced to confront a secret that could destroy them both. If you love CEO drama, forbidden tension, emotional twists, and stories that keep you awake at 2 a.m., hit subscribe now, because this story doesn't just unfold, it tightens its grip with every chapter. The night stretched thin over the city like a held breath, the kind of silence that only exists above 40 floors where the noise of traffic fades into a distant hum and the windows glow with borrowed moonlight, and she never planned to be there, never planned to step beyond the guest corridor, never planned to sit on the edge of the massive bed that smelled faintly of cedar, leather, and something unmistakably him, but exhaustion had a way of rewriting intentions, especially after 16 hours of meetings, apologies she didn't owe, problems she didn't create, and loyalty that was never noticed until it was tested, and so Mira Ellis found herself alone in her boss's penthouse bedroom, barefoot, hair loose, wearing the simple nightgown she kept folded in her emergency bag for nights when the office became home, her body sinking into silk sheets that felt too expensive to touch, her mind telling her to stand up even as her eyes closed against her will, because this wasn't just a bed, it was his bed, belonging to Adrian Blackwood, the man whose name carried weight in boardrooms and headlines alike, the man whose silence could end careers, the man who never stayed in one place long enough to leave warmth behind, and yet there she was, caught between fatigue and fear, between trust and transgression, listening to the faint ticking of a clock she didn't recognize, thinking only that she would rest for 5 minutes, just 5, before returning to the guest wing like a responsible employee, like a woman who understood boundaries, like someone who hadn't quietly held this empire together while he was away negotiating mergers and futures that never included her name. And sleep took her without permission, deep and sudden, the kind that erases time, the kind that leaves you defenseless when fate decides to walk through the door early, because Adrian Blackwood was not supposed to be home that night, not supposed to be standing in the doorway an hour later, coat still on, travel-weary eyes scanning a room that had never held another presence, never held another vulnerability, never held her, and when he saw her there, small against the vast bed, breathing softly, unaware, the world he controlled with precision tilted just enough to make him stop moving, just enough to make him question whether this was a mistake, a trespass, or a revelation he had been avoiding for far too long. He didn't speak at first, because power had taught him silence was often louder than confrontation, and he stood there watching the rise and fall of her chest, noticing details he had trained himself to overlook during daylight hours, the faint crease between her brows even in sleep, the way one hand curled instinctively toward the pillow as if reaching for something stable, something safe. And his first instinct was irritation, not anger but disbelief, the sharp edge of a man whose carefully ordered life had been interrupted in the most personal space he possessed, yet beneath that irritation lay something far more dangerous. Recognition, because Mira Ellis was not careless, not entitled, not reckless enough to cross such a line unless she had been pushed to it by circumstances he had failed to see, circumstances that began weeks earlier when he had left her in charge without realizing how much weight he had placed on her shoulders, how often she stayed late smoothing crises that never reached his desk, how the company praised him for victories she made possible, and his memory rewound itself against his will. He remembered the nights she slept at her desk, the coffee she drank cold, the meetings she took without complaint, and suddenly the sight of her there wasn't an invasion but an accusation, one that tightened his chest as he quietly set his bag down and stepped inside, telling himself he would wake her gently, tell her to leave, restore order, yet hesitating because waking her meant acknowledging the truth neither of them had voiced. That the distance between boss and employee had been narrowing for months, not through desire but through reliance, through trust forged under pressure, and when she finally stirred, lashes fluttering as awareness crept back into her eyes, the moment stretched thin again, her gaze unfocused before locking onto his, confusion giving way to horror in a heartbeat as she sat upright too fast, apologies spilling out in broken fragments, explanations tumbling over each other, her face burning with shame she didn't deserve, and he listened, really listened, for the first time, realizing that this wasn't about a bed or a mistake but about a woman who had given everything to a system that never asked how much it took from her. And the twist came not in his reaction but in his choice, because instead of ordering her out, instead of drawing the line she expected, he did something that would change them both. He told her to breathe, told her to stay seated, told her that the company's future wasn't the only thing resting on her shoulders anymore, and in that quiet confession lay the beginning of consequences neither of them could yet imagine, consequences that would ripple through boardrooms, reputations, and hearts in ways no contract could contain. By morning the city had reclaimed its voice, horns and sirens rising from the streets below like nothing extraordinary had occurred 40 floors above, yet everything had changed, because silence now existed between them where certainty once lived, and Mira felt it as she dressed in the guest bathroom Adrian insisted she use, the mirror reflecting a woman who looked the same but felt newly exposed, as if the night had peeled something away she could not put back on, and when she stepped into the kitchen she found him already awake, sleeves rolled, reading headlines on a tablet that already carried whispers of trouble, because power never slept long and neither did its enemies, and it was there, between coffee steam and glass walls, that the first real twist surfaced, not in the form of desire or accusation but in revelation, as Adrian admitted quietly that the board was moving against him, that someone had leaked internal projections during his absence, that the timing of his return had not been coincidence but damage control, and Mira understood with a tightening chest that the exhaustion that drove her into his bed had also made her the perfect scapegoat if things went wrong, because loyalty was invisible until it became convenient to betray it, and as the day unfolded with brutal efficiency she watched executives smile too widely, legal counsel grow evasive, and messages arrive that excluded her from conversations she once anchored, and then the blow landed exactly where it was designed to. An emergency board session, an anonymous complaint, and a narrative crafted with surgical precision suggesting impropriety, suggesting access, suggesting a woman who crossed boundaries for advantage, and the irony burned because the truth was far simpler and far crueler. She had crossed a boundary out of exhaustion, not ambition, and Adrian saw it all with a clarity that felt like punishment, realizing that the system he built was ready to devour the one person who held it together while he was gone, and for the first time since his rise he made a choice that could cost him everything, because instead of letting lawyers contain the fallout he stood in that boardroom and dismantled the lie piece by piece, exposing the leak, naming the rival who orchestrated it, and publicly claiming responsibility not as a man protecting himself but as one acknowledging failure, and when the fallout hit it was immediate. Stocks dipped, media speculated, allies retreated, but something else happened too, something no algorithm could predict, because the truth resonated, the market corrected, the rival was removed, and Mira was offered a promotion she declined, choosing instead to step away on her own terms, forcing Adrian to confront the final twist of the night that began it all, that what bound them was never the bet or the mistake but mutual recognition, respect earned under pressure, and when they parted weeks later on a rooftop overlooking the same city that never noticed them, there was no promise and no regret, only the quiet understanding that some moments exist not to begin something permanent but to reveal who you are when control slips, and as she walked away into a future no longer defined by his shadow and he returned to an empire reshaped by truth, both carried the same knowledge. One short night had changed everything, not because of where she slept, but because of what they finally chose to wake up to.